how to use the past to predict the future. By the time you're done with this video, you're going to understand how the past can and cannot help you with preparing for the future. First, we'll get started talking about how you can identify helpful data. Next, discover what tools you have at your disposal to make smart decisions using that information. Lastly, you're going to identify the wild card that you're likely not considering that will definitely impact your ability to predict and prepare for the future. You ready? Let's get started. The first thing we want to do is collect historical data. So whatever it is you're trying to predict the future of, we need data about that thing. So you might be saying, wait, what are you talking about, Crystal? I just want to predict the future in general. Well, that's kind of a big scope. That's kind of like saying you want to solve all the world's problems, including globalization issues and world peace, and making sure there's enough food for everyone. You can't tackle everything at one time. We have to break it up into pieces. And so when it comes to predicting the future, are you looking at the future of work in your industry? Are you looking at future revenue projections? Are you looking at the future of customer service in retail? So we want to get very, very specific, or even if we're talking about in your own life, are we looking at the future in regards to your relationships prospects, where we look at your dating history? Are we looking at the future of your finances? We have to kind of scale this down a little bit because otherwise we're dealing with too much data. The challenge that you're looking at is too big and it'll be overwhelming. And so whatever it is that you're trying to look at, the future of that thing, now we need to see what information we have available. I think probably one of the easiest examples would be, let's say we were looking at customer data. We're trying to see the future of sales in our business and we're looking at past customer data. Well, now's the time where you gather all the information from your customer relationship management system, or your CRM. If you don't know what that is, go ahead and check out some of my other videos on the topic, but you're going to get all the information there. You might have a different system that handles your sales. So you want to look at how much customers are buying, what the average sale is. If you can link the sales system to the CRM itself and see who's buying what, that's helpful too. So we have to take all of the data that we already have. And that's where we have to start. It's not fun. This is the least sexy part of the process. But really, without good data from the past, how can you predict the future? What we don't want to do is look at anecdotal evidence and just say, well, I know in the past, this is what was true. So in the future, this is likely what is true. Oftentimes, our perceptions of the past are skewed. And again, we're looking at anecdotal pieces. We're kind of giving a full picture without the details. And truly, some of those details might paint a different picture than we think. Now that we have the data that we need, we want to identify relevant patterns and trends. Now, in a very basic sense, if you go back to being in middle school and high school, you might remember using things like Excel sheets or some type of analyzing programs, or, depending on your age, you might have wrote all these things out. You start looking at means and averages and maybe doing them per month. This is where we start to look for patterns. Are we seeing that customers from this state tend to buy higher ticketed items? Are we seeing that customers that are over this age tend to have this buying pattern and they tend to buy more subscription services? We want to start looking for patterns. Now, for those of you that love puzzles, I'm a puzzler. I've been puzzling since I was literally a toddler before I could speak. I still to this day do puzzles weekly, right? And so that's where you're starting to look at the pieces of information to put a full picture together. Oftentimes people just assume something is true because they see an overall trend visually. That doesn't mean that that's actually the trend when we start to analyze the data. So number 2, we want to start looking for those trends and patterns. Now you might be saying, well, Crystal, I don't know how to actually find these patterns in my data. I don't know what to do. Well, this is where we do something called leveraging predictive models. So predictive models are any kind of tool that can help you, using the data that you already have, predict what's likely to come forward. So you're giving it a good amount of input, and based on that, it's going to give you some likely output. If you think about some examples of predictive models that you might be familiar with, think about weather apps. Those are a really great example because they're looking at data that's entered by weather professionals as well as historical data to make pretty accurate predictions overall. Stock market apps are another one. I don't know if you have any investments in the stock market or you're watching that. My husband does quite a bit of work in that area for us, and so he's constantly looking at these charts that are helping him make informed decisions. Another one that I bet you're familiar with. So you might be thinking, I don't use stock apps. Maybe you don't. Maybe you're not looking at the ones that are giving you all this extra data. Maybe you don't want to know how the sausage is made and you don't want to know all that goes into a weather app. So you're like, I don't know if that really applies. Well, here's one that I'm sure you're familiar with. Restaurant apps. They oftentimes show you how other people rated a restaurant. Based on that data, you are figuring out how likely you are to have that same experience. Sometimes you'll go in and you'll specifically look at the people who rated it 1 or 2 stars to see what their feedback was. If you start to see that, wait, all the 1 and 2 stars happen for breakfast, I want to go for dinner, you might feel a little bit better. Or if you're going for breakfast, you might say, even though this restaurant is 4.8 stars, I'm seeing that all the lower stars are for breakfast and I want breakfast. So this isn't a place for me. So that kind of gives you an idea of another model that you could use. Also, fitness tracking apps are another option when it comes to predictive models. So there's so many that you can use, from Excel sheets to apps where you can feed in your data. If you're in sales or if you have higher level pieces of information that need to be analyzed, you might have to look at hiring a data scientist. If you want to make it really simple, maybe you're a small business owner, or maybe just an individual who has a lot of information, you're trying to figure out how to make heads or tails of it, you might actually want to hire a data scientist that can run the information for you and help you. There are numerous pieces of technology that can help you in leveraging predictive models. Before I share with you the one thing that most people do not consider before using past historical data to predict the future, the one thing that most people don't do that actually gets them into trouble, before we go there, I have to ask you this question. Have you already subscribed to the channel? If you have not, what are you waiting for? You're missing out on so many juicy pieces of information. Go ahead and subscribe right now. Let's talk about that one thing that most people do not consider when using the past to predict the future. That one thing is human bias. It's not just a matter of looking at information and making smart deductions from that. At the end of the day, whoever is analyzing this information has a viewpoint. We've all heard of scientific studies that were disproven or shown to be a little biased because the researcher themselves already had an idea of what the outcome should be. And so they tend to analyze information from that angle. And I'm not talking about people who outright change the results, but people who, I'm sure in life you've encountered people where you can both look at the same exact piece of information and draw 2 completely different conclusions. Neither one of you are doing anything wrong. Your perspective matters. Well, guess what? When it comes to looking at that past data and predicting what's coming up next, our own human biases play a huge role. We're going to go over a few of the biases you should be aware of because what we want to do is make sure that we're not falling into this unfortunate trap. So the first one is, let's look at temporal discounting. Temporal discounting is simply a bias where humans tend to put greater value on immediate return on investment. So they tend to look in the short term. Now, I'm sure you can imagine me being a futurist and us talking about predicting the future, how that could be challenging if humans are automatically trying to discount things that happen further off and they're looking for immediate rewards. What happens is it tends to skew our views in that we try to take action that's going to pay off in the short term versus the long term. I bet you all can think of some politicians that do that from all walks of life, right? Another bias is optimism bias. Now, we don't all have that. A lot of this has to do with our earlier life conditioning. But do you know people that no matter what's happening, they're like, woo, right now, you could set their hair on fire. And they'd be like, that's toasty. But you know what? I'm feeling good. I needed this run that this caused me to make to try to put out this fire. I'm feeling great now. So those people that have that type of bias tend to not be in a position to prepare for the future, especially for some of the negative possibilities, because they tend to always want to see that glass is half full, even if it's half full of poison. That's a little bit of a problem. Another one is hindsight bias. Hindsight bias is an interesting one because all it means is that we tend to look at things that have happened in the past and we think that they were more predictable than they were. Now you might be saying, well, what does this have to do with predicting the future? The problem is people with hindsight bias are typically very slow or cautious about making any decisions for the future because they're afraid of making mistakes, because they tend to think that things are even more predictable than they are. So hindsight bias is another bias that we need to be super aware of. So there's many more biases, but the last one we're going to touch on today is one that is super important because it can present a massive hurdle when taking that information that we've analyzed and then applying it to what we're going to do in the future. And that's cognitive dissonance. All that means is that when we're presenting with information that contradicts our beliefs or worldviews, we tend to skew it in our minds and either ignore it or find a way to discount it so that we can continue on the path that we want. So I think you can see how someone that has something like hindsight bias that is coupled with optimism bias could be extremely dangerous, because now any signals that they see, any trends or patterns that are skewing towards an event that may not be ideal, they're going to discount that information. They'll find a way mentally to discount that information and continue on believing that they're headed towards a positive future. And that can be true in reverse for people that tend to be pessimistic as well. So cognitive dissonance is something that all of us have dealt with at some point in time, whether we think we have or not. In fact, when I talk about cognitive dissonance and us all suffering from it, if you immediately think, ooh, not me, guess what? That's probably cognitive dissonance right there, because there have been times where you've done this. The point of the matter is that we want to make sure that as we're preparing for the future, we are accounting for these biases, because if we're the decision makers, if we're on a team, if we have bosses or higher ups or other people that we're partnering with as we're planning for the future, at home, if it's our family members, understand that other people's cognitive dissonance can truly have a hurtful impact on your ability to predict the future and then go on to prepare for it. Because at the end of the day, none of us want to predict the future just for the sake of predicting it. We want to be able to manage it and hopefully come out on top. So 2 more points before we're done today. The first one is I want you to use the past as a guide, but it does not mean that just because something has been a past pattern that it will continue to exist in the same way. We've seen this happen all around us over the last 100 years, where certain things happened in certain patterns, and then those patterns just simply broke apart. So we use it as a guide, but we also have backup plans for unintended things that may also reasonably happen as well. The last thing I want to share with you, data is great, and I believe it's extremely important. Many of our poorest decisions as a society or as a world wouldn't happen if we used more data. Oftentimes we go off of gut feelings and emotions, and I'm not saying there's not a place for those things, but in terms of making intelligent decisions so that we can prepare, that can hurt us a little bit. And so I just want to caution you that in addition to all of this wonderful data, all of this wonderful information that we're looking at, I want you to combine wisdom with adaptability. And again, wisdom isn't just that gut feeling. That's not what I mean. But sometimes you can look at solutions that are presented, you can look at data, and you know based on everything else that's going on, because remember, we're only looking at a little segment of the future at a time. You might know that based on things happening in these other segments, wisdom dictates this might look a little different in the future. Maybe we should approach it this way because all these other variables are happening. That is wisdom. And as you look at this information, make sure that you stay highly adaptable, because the future is not already written in stone. The possibilities of the future are constantly changing as we're changing our behaviors and the way that we prepare. Now, speaking of preparing for the future, I have a wonderful free tool for you. In the description of this video, there's a link to download the Future Ready Playbook. This playbook is chock full of all kinds of great activities and worksheets and questions that are going to make you work through your future and be more strategic about what happens in the end. So go ahead, take a moment and download it right now.